3:14, the temperature is 32 degrees below 0 Celsius. On the western shore of the Chosin Reservoir, the wind was moving at nearly 50 kilometers per hour, slicing across the frozen hills and driving powdered snow into every exposed surface. Visibility fluctuated between 10 meters and nothing at all. Breath crystallized in the air before it could disappear. Inside foxholes carved into ground harder than concrete, men were trembling, not only from cold, but from the awareness that something was wrong. The rifle still looked the same. That was the problem. Corporal James Farrell rested his M1 Garand across his knees, gloved fingers wrapped around the wooden stock. The walnut felt rigid, almost brittle. The metal receiver pressed through the fabric of his gloves with a weight that felt subtly different, denser, heavier, as though the cold had changed its mass. It hadn't. But it had changed something else. No one had truly calculated what -32 degrees would do to the inside of that rifle. The M1 Garand was not an experimental weapon. It was battle-proven. Gas-operated. Semi-automatic. 8-round EN block clip. A design praised for reliability during World War II. When the trigger was pulled, expanding gases from the fired cartridge traveled through a small port beneath the barrel. Those gases entered a cylinder roughly 0.52 inches in diameter, driving a piston rearward. That rearward motion forced the bolt to unlock and cycle back, ejecting the spent casing. A calibrated spring, manufactured within precise tolerances, compressed and then drove the bolt forward again, chambering the next round. The entire cycle completed in well under half a second. Under normal conditions. At room temperature, the lubricant applied to the bolt group had a viscosity between roughly 10 and 15 centipoise. Thin enough to allow near frictionless motion. Thick enough to protect metal surfaces from wear. Engineers had tested that oil across a wide operational range. Rain. Mud. Dust. Moderate cold. But moderate cold ends at about -15 degrees Celsius. Below -25, viscosity increases exponentially. At -32 degrees, the lubricant inside Farrell's rifle was no longer behaving like oil. Its viscosity had climbed past 200 centipoise. It had become adhesive. Gel-like. Resistant. Instead of reducing friction, it was creating it. Instead of facilitating motion, it was resisting it. And metal itself does not remain unchanged in such temperatures. Steel contracts approximately 0.012% per 10 degrees Celsius drop in temperature. That sounds insignificant. Fractions of a millimeter. But the clearance between the Garand's bolt and receiver was already specified between 0.01 and 0.02 inches. Those tolerances were engineered for efficiency. For speed. For reliability. They were not engineered for -32. 3:27. A radio transmission crackled through the frozen darkness. Movement had been detected beyond the ridgeline. Farrell rose from the edge of his foxhole. His gloves felt clumsy. He adjusted his grip and pulled the rifle to his shoulder. He disengaged the safety. He pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. He pulled again. Silence. Not the sharp recoil he expected. Not the metallic snap of cycling steel. Just a dead trigger and a still rifle. For half a second, his brain refused to process it. Training kicked in. Immediate action drill. Clear the chamber. Cycle the bolt. Re-engage. He grabbed the operating rod and pulled. The bolt moved less than a centimeter before stopping. He pulled harder. The resistance was wrong. It was not mechanical failure. It was not a broken spring. It felt like the rifle was pushing back. Because it was. Inside the gas cylinder, the piston was encased in thickened lubricant. The gas port, designed to channel explosive pressure into controlled motion, was partially obstructed by a viscous barrier. The spring force, carefully calibrated during design, had been calculated for a specific friction coefficient. That coefficient no longer applied. The force required to overcome the gelled lubricant exceeded the spring's capacity. The rifle had not malfunctioned. It had encountered a condition it had never been built to face. This was not the first warning. During the winter of 1944 on the Western Front, scattered field reports mentioned inconsistent cycling in extreme cold. Those reports noted sluggish bolts and delayed cycling times exceeding 1 second. Technical officers recorded them. Some recommended evaluating alternative lubricants for sub-zero conditions. But the issue had been categorized as non-critical. Wartime logistics prioritized ammunition production and vehicle maintenance. A lubrication anomaly in rare cold environments did not reach top engineering review. The file was closed. Now, at Chosin, the file had reopened itself. Across the line, other Marines were experiencing the same failure. Some attempted to fire and heard only the dull click of a hammer striking without full bolt closure. Others forced the bolt manually, converting their semi-automatic rifles into single-shot weapons. A design built for rapid cycling had been reduced to manual repetition. Improvisation began immediately. One Marine pressed the barrel beneath his armpit inside his parka. Another cupped his hands around the receiver and exhaled repeatedly, human breath at roughly 36.6 degrees Celsius, briefly warming a narrow strip of steel. 5 minutes of body heat could reduce lubricant viscosity just enough to allow one functioning cycle. Human warmth became a mechanical solution. Others made a more radical choice. They stripped their rifles completely and removed the lubricant altogether. Under ordinary doctrine, running a rifle dry increased wear and long-term damage risk. But frozen oil created more resistance than bare metal. A dry bolt, though unprotected, could at least move. Physics favored friction over adhesion. Field armorists began searching for alternatives. Clock oil, lower viscosity, thinner film strength, remained fluid at temperatures approaching -40. But it was not standard issue. Supply lines were rigid. Substitution required improvisation at unit level. Some technicians mixed solvents into existing oil to reduce thickness. Ratios were guessed, not calculated. But the rifles began cycling again. Meanwhile, engineers back home had not anticipated this scenario during initial design validation. Testing environments rarely drop below -20 degrees. Cold weather protocols existed, but the assumption was that lubrication would behave linearly across temperature changes. It does not. Viscosity curves steepen dramatically beyond certain thermal thresholds. Lubricant molecules lose kinetic mobility. Internal friction increases. At -32 degrees, oil becomes resistance. Metal does not care about design intent. 341. Farrell pulled the rifle beneath his parka and waited. Snow continued to strike the foxhole wall. His fingers, nearly numb, felt faint warmth returning to the receiver. After several minutes, he tried the operating rod again. This time, it moved. The bolt retracted fully. The spent round ejected. The next cartridge chambered. The rifle functioned. But this was not victory. It was adaptation. In the weeks following the Chosin campaign, maintenance manuals were revised. Cold weather lubrication tables were rewritten. New formulations with verified viscosity stability below -40 degrees Celsius were introduced into standard distribution. Training emphasized environmental boundary conditions. Soldiers were instructed to run weapons lightly lubricated or dry in extreme cold. Testing procedures expanded to include lower temperature thresholds. The weapon itself did not change. The assumptions did. Engineering rarely fails because of arithmetic errors. It fails because of incomplete environmental imagination. Every tolerance, every clearance value, every spring tension carries an implicit assumption about the world it will operate in. When reality diverges from that assumption, even perfect calculations collapse. At -32 degrees, the M1 Garand did exactly what it was built to do. It followed physics. The engineers had not ignored cold. They had underestimated it. Farrell survived that night. But survival was not the lesson. The lesson was this: in extreme environments, the smallest overlooked variable, oil viscosity, metal contraction, fractional tolerances, can determine whether a machine fulfills its purpose or becomes a liability. At Chosin, human body heat temporarily corrected an engineering blind spot. A man's warmth compensated for a misjudged boundary condition. Engineering is flawless on paper. Reality begins where the paper ends.